Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening to some of you who are joining from the Far East. All right, we have the entire panel here. My name is Prakash Gupta, founding Chief Revenue Officer at Turing, and I'm happy for two reasons today. Thrilled. First is I'm here in this panel with a very diverse group of engineering leaders who come from various organizations, fast scaling startups to very matured organizations, companies dealing with software as a product or a combination of hardware and software. So we are going to have a very interesting conversation today. These are leaders who are going to talk about the lessons they learned in the field, managing remote engineering teams through the last 12 months. The second reason I'm thrilled is I have twin boys. They are 6 years old. They are in sixth grade. They're 12 years old, and today is their first day going back to school after 12 months of staying at home and studying from home. And I'm thrilled because now both me and my wife have complete monopoly on the internet connection starting today. So I don't have to worry about they playing Fortnite while I'm trying to do this meeting. Uh, with this, let's start with the first question. What I would do is, Praveen, and maybe can start with you and go clockwise. Uh, Introduce yourselves. Who do you work with? What is your role? Tell us about your organization, and think of the first 3 to 6 months when the pandemic hit, and what were the challenges that you faced as a leader and your engineering organizations. Walk us through the first 3 to 6 months of the pandemic. Praveen, over to you.
Okay, great. First of all, thanks to Prakash, you and the panelist, as well as the Turing team, to invite us over to share our thoughts. My name is Praveen Desal. I run an engineering organization for a company called Veritas. Veritas, just from a context perspective, as I talk about some of the challenges in first couple of quarters during the pandemic, we operate within enterprise data protection, data availability, and data management space. Our product portfolio essentially helps customers automate their enterprise needs from protection, disaster recovery, snapshots, uh, data management, monetizing data, trying to keep up with evolving regulations of data, both from protection as well as availability standpoint. So in and everything from a 24/7 availability standpoint for their business critical applications is really our customer base. So we serve about 80,000 customers across the 150 plus countries, and most of our customers are in that traditional pillars: healthcare, financials, transportation, and a number of various segments. And most of these are 87% of the top Fortune 500 customers is also we have privilege to serve them. So and we have about 2,000 engineers that work on all of these wonderful products. So when pandemic hit, and I remember it was sort of mid-March, where across the globe we had to ask our teams to go home and start working from home. So first few days, as part of executive team, our immediate attention was obviously on all of the stakeholders. So one is how do we sort of test our processes, development processes, so we can continue the momentum on product development, delivery. But more importantly, all our customers also had to go home, and they were dealing with working remotely. So how do we work with them to ensure that their data is protected and their data is accessible, available from somewhat stressing the new use cases, if you will, right? as all of us go around on our age compute or laptops, and suddenly the demands from those tunnels increased rapidly. So we had to be conscious of the fact that we needed to spend a lot of time with our customers to make sure they are not in difficult spot. So that was sort of second challenge. And then third challenge was obviously we were in the middle of scaling a few of our teams. And so how do we keep momentum on our staffing or onboarding, making sure people, it's extremely difficult for new employee to join remotely, not having necessary face time to be able to become productive in the code base that they haven't seen. So all of those aspects, I would say, the challenges were sort of in those three key categories. And along this discussion, I'll be happy to provide perspective on how we tried to solve the problem, and we learned a lot out of that. But I think it has made our company better for future. There's no question about it.
Thank you, Praveen. Praveen, now I invite Henrik to share and let us know about you and your organization as well, please.
Yeah, so I'm Henrik. First and foremost, I'm a single parent of two. So in case you see me run out, it's because they're both asleep at this point. Mm-hmm. And you never know. Either way, I work at a company called Proxy. We do a digital ID for the physical world. So it revolves around your presence, having a phone like this one with your identity on, and being able to interact with things out in the wild. Now, first and foremost, we made an access product around this. So basically, you put our Proxy readers on doors at your company, and then you use mobile access instead of having these plastic cards that you lose all the time, which is quite costly. Now, we also do actual ID verifications coming up here, and a lot of other things. So basically, we're both a B2B and a B2C company in that sense. We try to, our focus as a company is basically to be able to use your identities that you have online with physical interactions. So it's quite cool. It's the companies I've worked with in the past, they talk about full stack. I mean, the true full stack is we're actually engineering the hardware, we're doing firmware, we're doing embedded software, we're doing the whole chain all the way to the APIs and the dashboards and the phones and everything. So it's quite a ride. Now, I was actually, I would say I was the first remote or distributed engineer at the company already 3 years ago. Since then, I scaled the distributed team. We're quite a few more around the world, but in the team that I'm in charge of, we're almost 20. When COVID hit, the whole company had to do what we did every day. You know, we hang around in Zooms, we use Slack, we're all about being asynchronous. We use tools, you know, GitHub for pull requests, Notion, all these things that you normally do when you work crazy shifts or you overlap time zones. Now, getting the organization to get to the same state took quite a while. They started using our onboard guides because we were already, you know, you get a computer the day you start, and then you get to solve your own onboarding. So you need to find people to reach out to and these things. So we had the whole company twist toward that. The only fundamental issue with that is when you're dealing with hardware, because you need labs. So we could close down all the offices, but the only thing that we couldn't solve was people having to have hardware. So we had people, the solid engineers, they set up camp in their garage or on the attic, and we had to go really crazy with that stuff. But in the end, we actually fell back on offering a couple of spots around the world where they can do their hardware and due diligence. And yeah, it's been quite a ride. One of the biggest lessons, I would say, is coming from both a distributed organization. So we were split. We had an HQ, so we had an office, and we had remote engineers. Now that I think is one of the toughest pieces to solve, because you're always going to have one-on-one meetings, people hang around at the office and they talk to each other, come up with new ideas and stuff, and you're always having a long tail on the engineers that aren't there. Now, what happened with COVID, one of the biggest lessons is that when everybody was forced to become distributed, the velocity of the teams that we already had remote, it really, exceeded expectations and raised, because they were included in the daily talks. And that was quite nice to see.
Very interesting. In fact, before the panel, we had Darren from GitLab, head of remote, and he spoke about having two parallel cultures. One is the HQ culture versus the remote. And for everyone who is listening in, Henrik is joining from Sweden. Just so everyone knows. Thank you, Henrik, for being on the panel. Sweden, over to you.
Yeah, it's 10 p.m. now or something. 9.
10 p.m. night, yes.
Why the kids are asleep, of course.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sunila Joshi. I'm a director in Abbott in Los Angeles. Thanks for inviting me here, Prakash. We go long ways. I've been in the industry for about 25 plus years. I've developed and led software solutions for different industries, finance, auto, but for the most part, medical device industry. So the currently, saying in the simplest terms, the division I work for is creates pacemakers and ICDs. I think that kind of explains the work much better than saying, class 3 medical devices and all that stuff. So basically, there is the embedded software, there's external software, and then there is cloud software. So, we're managing all of those different components of software. Cybersecurity is one of the biggest, design concepts, and privacy are, again, right now, newest and topmost priorities, along with all of the cutting edge technologies that we are introducing and using every day. So that has been my experience. I've had distributed systems in multiple locations all this time. But like Jonathan mentioned in one of the earlier talks, we were definitely one of the companies that were suddenly thrown into working remotely out of nowhere. Personally, in my 25 plus years of experience, I had never one day worked from home. I loved going to office, always, enjoyed being there. And then suddenly I was forced to work from home. And I must say, we are now at almost a 1-year anniversary of this COVID remote working, and I'm loving it. It's amazing. And I think the other thing I noticed, based on my own productivity and my own, work ethics and how much I could contribute more working remotely. And again, with all of my direct staff and their productivity, I think this is an excellent, definite good change. And, we were able to deliver pretty much all our deliverables and project timelines and follow processes very well. So definitely something we were thrown, blindly into, forced to take on remote, but it has worked out really well so far. So when COVID happened, some of the challenges are obviously I think all of us faced, but creating software as medical devices and software in medical devices. Both of those have, unique challenges, which are, always the equipment, like Henrik mentioned. I think we all have, right from an artificial heart, which is a hardware that we must use in all our testing. We have huge test labs, and not my entire team could go remote. So there were several people that were essential, and they were going into office. So one of the challenges we had was making sure to find whoever could work remotely, equip them with the hardware that they needed. And especially developers could pretty much work remotely without any issues. It was the verification engineers who had, more challenges because they needed the labs. So one of the interesting things was how, we have a huge verification offshore in India, and they used to, even though they went into the office offshore, they were remotely connecting to our labs here for testing. So in a way, they were remote. And then as soon as our on-site team also became remote, they kind of started sharing the pain of how the issues were faced by the offshore team. So in a way, it brought, synergies from the offshore teams, as well as, multiple teams within the US. So I think, yeah, it was a big transition, but overall, it was a very successful year altogether.
Very good. Good to know, and I appreciate the sincerity with the engineer, especially it's life-saving devices and software that is being created as part of your team. So really appreciate that. Andy, over to you. Andy is joining us from the great state of Colorado. Welcome, Andy, please.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for Turing. Andy O'Dower here, product management leaders have led engineering, design, UX, developer relations, both in B2C categories, mobile apps, and B2B. Most recently, for the last couple of years at Wowza, which is a live streaming developers platform. For live streaming anything you could possibly imagine over the web, and all sorts of different applications there. Moving into that same industry, into a large communications platform as a service. Staying with that theme, I think it's a very exciting infrastructure and platform to power communications, as we are not going back to at least 2019, and it's undetermined, but we know that communications are at the epicenter of everything that we do, no matter what it is that we're building. So I have experience in both hybrid with an HQ, physical HQ. Our office is 15 minutes away from where I live. I was in the office about 2/3 of the time with other leaders. But then we had distributed workforce around the country and around the world, a small office in Berlin, customer support, technical customer support that was all around the world. As you can imagine, customers that are building mission critical live streaming applications need instant help, no matter the time, day or hour. And so, for me and my teams, as we were actually doing 2020 planning in 2019, our VP of engineering at the time had brought up, what about instability that could affect 2020? Little did we know, what macro instability was waiting for us in 2020. But some major challenges, having already been distributed for about half of the company, largely an engineering organization and building technical products for developers and enterprises. We had a lot of that remote aspect down and dealing with multiple time zones, and as Henrik alluded to, using Slack, using a lot of Zoom, a lot of Slack, a lot of Confluence is a tool that we used for just wiki style documentation to be that our knowledge base for documentation. I think for us, it hit us on two fronts. One was our product roadmap of what did we need to do to change. So there's a lot of uncertainty as that hit, because we are also offering tools to customers to build communications solutions for their customers. And so we had that as one piece, and then we had just the company as a whole in terms of how we were going to work together. So very much in flux, and I think we were able to successfully navigate it, but we were navigating it on two fronts. We did a large pivot to focus more on real-time communications software, whereas we previously had not as a company, and had customers clamoring for it. And then that forced us also into a communication style change, whereas previously, you can have your engineering team that is already living on Zoom, already having, GitHub and pull requests and documentation tools, so everything is available. Now we're asking that of the rest of the organization, that they can start to adopt some of those workflows, and so that was a challenge for us to bring people into that style of workflow that were not normally ready or ready to adapt and have the tools and the skill sets to be able to do that. So I think that was a major challenge for us. Those asynchronous was really key. As I've heard before, all business problems end up being communication problems. So at the very base level, and so we tried to essentially rewrite the playbook for how we were going to communicate with each other, and then with customers moving out each group. So as part of the leadership team, we knew that we had to make some changes and had to break some old tools that were there and break some old habits that were there. I think one big thing that helped us is ensuring that each team felt bought into what tools and solutions we were going to do. It was not going to work to have a tops-down, forcing function to everyone operate. We had to adopt what works for different teams, and then let that pull into the rest of the organization. And I know we'll get into some of the other topics of radical transparency in terms of documentation and business processes and access to information. So I think we were able to grow the business, certainly, and help customers in a time of need. But it did require both company changes and our roadmap change in our product.
Very interesting. In the previous conversation, there was, Darren again mentioned about a handbook, remote first handbook that GitLab has created. So I think every organization adopting a version of that suits their unique business requirements will be great. Anna.
Hi, Prakash. Thanks you for letting me go last, because I really needed to have some context here. So now I understand. I just want to have, as the first thing that I want to say is that I'm very internally facing executive at Carta Healthcare. So if I say something that is embarrassing or inappropriate, it's not Carta Healthcare's fault, and the organization has its stuff together. It's just me. So just with that, so yeah, Carta Healthcare, our mission is to help hospitals improve both clinically and operationally. And our stage is fresh post-Series A. So for us right now, it's very much about who works here versus where we're going. I started reading all those business books. In business school, they had us read business books. I was working on Carta, so I couldn't really read them. And now, finally, I'm starting to catch up. And those business books, they all talk about that it's really important at our stage, any stage, but specifically us, is to make sure that the who is on the bus in terms of people is much more important than where we're going. We're going to save healthcare, that's clear. But right now, we want to make sure that the people we have are the right people, and the people we're going to get are the right fit. That said, we have a pretty well-developed platform for ingesting data from various sources, which is the most critical part in healthcare. There's no unified data model, and I'm sure that you guys experienced that. We have, it's a complicated problem. It's it's multifaceted, and we have a platform that is generic enough that can be adapted to address most of the data needs in terms of data unification, which will enable sharing the data. And that is really critical in healthcare, and that is not enabled at all. And that's the core problem behind a lot of things, including doing multi-institutional studies. It's really hard to do multi-institutional studies if you can share the data. If you cannot do multi-institutional studies, you cannot make data-driven decisions to improve care. This is critical. So that's sort of the, and I don't want to talk about our business model because I don't think this panel is about that. So the challenges for us were, as I said, it's all about people for us right now. And the challenges that we had was with the remote sort of shift. It's the same challenge we had before, but only amplified. Because what do we need? We need people who are passionate, who are going to work very hard, harder than they would normally do, any other place. Because if they don't, then we're definitely not going to transform healthcare with 20 people. Not going to happen. So we need those folks, right? And we need to build trust. And the trust is hard to build, especially if somebody is remote and in a different time zone. How are we going to do that? That was a challenge. And I guess I'll talk about that challenge and how we solved it later, so that we can jump into the discussion.
Thank you. And I was, this is such a fascinating panel, and you have so many stories. I was just informed that we are halfway into our time slot, so let's move to the core of the discussion. And without any particular order, I want to now invite one of you to volunteer and talk through the solutions, the stabilization phase. How did you stabilize your team? How do you continue to hire? How do you continue to onboard? How do you define success for a remote software engineer in this new normal? And to let you know, there are several other leaders who are listening in to you from engineering teams across the world. There are several remote engineers who are now also adjusted to this new way. So think of share your best practices and principles and advice with both of these constituents in mind. And without any particular order, anyone would like to volunteer? Please, Henrik.
Yeah. So Prakash, you mentioned, and we had Darren from GitLab here before. So one of the things that we did very early on was to look at their official documentation. They're doing remote first. Some of our early members in Proxy know some of the people who started GitLab as well, and they've been highly successful at this. I urge anyone who needs to understand how to run a remote organization to look at their wiki. It's like that's a boilerplate to success. Mm-hmm. Now everybody is not as lucky to have that sheer amount of documentation ready to go internally. So just pick the best ones and adopt. That's a quick way to success, I'd say, especially with onboarding. They're even as transparent as they're posting some of their internal documentation on how they handle things. Might not suit your needs, but either way, that was one of the first things we did. How is everybody else that's already remote dealing with this? And GitLab is a great asset and resource.
I might add to that what Henrik's saying is, you hear a lot of the times the saying, you ship your org chart in terms of how you have structured your company, your organization, makes its way into your products and offerings. That in that same, it's a mindset shift too, and how you resource is really how you're invested or how you are not. So I think having, a company that is remote first, resourcing that there are people that is not just an afterthought. We're doing all of these things, and by the way, it's going to be remote. Flipping that on its head to start resourcing and having everything That's a first principle that you're thinking of. And if it's an HR function or department leads that are hiring, that they understand that mindset and cognizant of what is different now that this is remote right at the beginning. And I could see more companies adding those, whether at the leadership level or at the director level, that are purely focused on how do we foster and facilitate and resource our teams and our people to be distributed, instead of we're going to do everything else, but by the way, it's going to be distributed. So mindset shift, but it's very powerful and needs to make its way into budget and processes and how people think.
Yeah. I'll ask a question and feel free to jump in. All of you managed a team of engineers before the pandemic, and you continue to manage the same team and grew that team. Do you see a difference in your top performers pre-pandemic versus the remote team? What is your advice to the engineers who are logging in and listening to all of you? What are the new traits of a remote-first engineer, remote-friendly engineer?
Well, I can add a couple of thoughts on that, Prakash. If the toolkit that I think the panel has referenced earlier, frankly, the process of going remote has been indirectly has been in flow already, right? So you look at companies like ours or many other companies within the paradigm. When you install a remote team, in the beginning, you tend to go through hiring of senior folks, and then you start to scale a bunch of little teams within that umbrella. To be able to do that efficiently and get productivity out of those teams and get the desired results, you had to have invested in sort of remote first methodology within your development process, right? So now when everybody's remote, that gets stressed further, and all of what the panel has described earlier, which is all the good practices around being transparent, being open about the intent. I think one of the biggest lessons we learned is at individual engineer level, how do you increase that sense of belonging and really the sense of purpose? Because every day, the day elongates rapidly when you're remote, because there is no easy difference between personal space versus workspace. So therefore, by definition, we saw a significant productivity rise across the board. But we also realized that, hey, let's look at it from a long game perspective, that how long can we sustain this? And so we had to come up with the concepts of if you want to get together with your team, then have certain casual hours, have certain settings where you could actually do a little bit of creative innovation versus delivering the product, right? Because delivering product, I think across the panel, everybody agreed that the velocity, if anything, improved, it didn't decrease, right? To answer your question on high performers, we didn't discover any difference between the high performers that were at on-site. What we did discover is what Hendrik mentioned earlier, which is people who were already remote, and we had about 25% of our workforce remote already going into pandemic. So they saw a tremendous jump in their output, because now they had their friends who now understand what they go through, and they are doing better job of documenting or better job of outreaching, and everything else is very valid. The asynchronous communication, 5 or 6 different mechanisms, and we continue to encourage that, right? So even text or WhatsApp, whatever works for you. But and those little spurts of communication are very, very critical. 1 minute conversation with your team leader or scrum leader. And so when you have hundreds of little ships going in a certain direction, it's important to have a little bit flexibility for those smaller teams which are 8 to 10 people each. And when they are connected with customers and delivering these releases on regular basis, it's not one top-down approach doesn't work. So some amount of flexibility is very, very important. So that's a couple of points I wanted to add here.
Sure.
I can add to that is that definitely it's the same with me. We didn't see any changes in our performance in our top performers or others. I think people, in fact, worked harder, and it was on us as leaders to trust that and challenge that in some ways, but also to support the teams. I think that would be another point I would add on, is that as leaders, we had to empathize on what our employees were going through in different scenarios, and provide solutions that were meaningful. Like something Abbott has is that as pandemic started, they have allowed us to have 2 hours per week tutoring for anyone, starting from kindergarten to engineering students. And you won't believe how useful something like that can be, even for a college student who's getting frustrated doing engineering from home, right? And so tools like that, or sending larger emails to leadership saying, we have to be flexible with our employees who have little kids or managing older parents, or and having that communication go on again and again to remind us to empathize and to remind us to appreciate what our employees may be having, the challenges the employees may be having working remotely. I think some of those, also like employee assistance programs where we have, online tools, personal, like virtual counseling on various topics. I think having that backing from the company is also very important for the remote to work, especially for companies like us who were thrown into it out of nowhere.
We are at the 8-minute warning mark, and I want you to take the stage. I want you to share. I know you continue to scale your team. Building a startup can be very challenging during these times. Versus, we are hearing from Praveen and Sunila and Andy, who are coming from established companies. Tell us how you pivoted as a startup.
Well, I guess I can tell you, I guess, something useful. Hopefully, that as our teams sort of our size can hopefully take and learn from, and what I can say what is working, why it's working. It's maybe I'm having some reasons and consequences sort of mixed up, the correlation versus causality sort of issues. So I don't know, but definitely can sort of share the experience of what worked well. Well, to start with, our organization, leadership in our organization means that you work the hardest. It doesn't mean intensity, of course. It means quantity. Those can be not very intense, but you got to put 14 hours, and it can be, and then basically that's sort of the leadership responsibility, because without that, I don't think we would be able to build trust, right? And then the part about building trust is basically what I think we succeeded in is creating a community of people who share one shared goal, like more than one. But they definitely have the passion for healthcare. And if they don't have that, they definitely have the passion to learn things, and they want to matter, and they value, I hope so, being part of that community. And what is important is they must perform their best, because if they don't, then they let their other teammates down. And all we need to do to sustain that, I hope, is to hire for people to who that's a problem. The fact that you're letting other people down is a problem for you, and enough of a problem. I think for most people it's a problem, but the question is that a motivating problem or not? So we're hoping that we have people to who that is motivating, and that has consequences for us. And the consequences are, if somebody is not contributing, they are just they're not contributing and costing us resources. They are compromising the entire thing we built. So that means we have to hire right people, which brings us in a cost-effective way, because there's no way we're going to compete on anything. I mean, we're not going to compete on salary. We can compete on mission alignment, but that in the Silicon Valley gets you only junior talent. Junior talent can be wonderful, and we actually developed, because we have a beautiful platform, remember I told you that, so beautiful set of tools to onboard them and make them productive quickly in a cost-effective way. But the real sort of, the platform needs to be developed and maintained remotely. That's just what that had to happen with pandemic. It obviously need to happen, and we need to be better than other folks to figure out how do we find the talent that is aligned with our mission and the talent who has skills. And for us, mission is really important, more important than skills, because, you know, if they are passionate and we can't make them useful, well, shame on us. In the case of our organization, that's, of course, processes matter. Jira matters a lot. We're religious about Jira, of course. If they're not ready to be religious about Jira, they shouldn't, of course, come work for us. That makes sense, because Jira is critical. But but anyway, one thing that is important: we're building trust. We're empowering people. People need to feel empowered because they need to get something more than just a paycheck out of Carta. Because those people we don't want. We want people to be happy, productive, growing. And the one thing that business school people told me to do. I went to business school, and that's one of the things I vaguely remember is that feedback is important and that feedback is a gift. So we implemented feedback. And feedback was very insightful. We implemented two kinds of feedback. Direct feedback to your reporting manager and the anonymous employee survey. And we took actions based on what happened with this feedback and anonymous employee survey. And we also, specifically for devs, we have a development experience epic, where if you struggle with something, your machine doesn't work, you're not enjoying that button, you can make a ticket, and we'll prioritize it.
Yeah, good point. And the rest of the panel, I just was informed we have 3 more minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to publish this panel that we asked the audience, and this is the results. What do you think is the biggest advantage of remote software development teams? And this is what the audience had to say: higher quality talent, ability to quickly scale, increase in creativity and productivity that we discussed. I want to go across the room now. What are each one of you, and we'll have to do this within 3 minutes for all of you to conclude. What is the future for your organization? Hybrid, fully remote, go back to where it was? And we can start with Praveen. We can start with you.
Yeah, so I think the survey results are indeed in line with what I would have thought. The only thing I would think is improved retention. I would probably say that with right processes, I think retention would jump pretty high as well. Our plans are to go hybrid, right? We want to provide flexibility to teams and engineers that have very dense working environment at home, when they feel like using facilities, that they have ability to avail that. But also for complex projects, people who prefer face-to-face have some ability. But generally, remote first with hybrid option is where we are. Thanks.
Thank you, Praveen. Henrik?
Yeah, okay, so we're currently fully remote in that sense. We're not going back. I would argue quite quick that lower costs is not something that we're ever going to look at. That has nothing to do with it. Yep. It's all about talent, and you want to find the right fit, as Anna put it, like the cultural fit and the talent in combination, and where that sits doesn't matter.
Sunita, last word for you.
Abed has in more inclined to be in-house and maybe hybrid second.
Okay, good to know that. Andy?
We'll be hybrid, heavy remote across every, from leadership to engineer. I think if companies are looking at this as purely cost savings, they're going to be in trouble in a couple of years. So it will be a blend, and investing in ensuring people are set up for success at home and getting creative.
And a last word.
Yeah, sure. Definitely hybrid, for sure.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I think we are spot on time. We could have continued for an hour or two more. I'm almost inclined to, think of a clubhouse type session where it's just audio and we can talk for a few hours and we can have thousands of people interacting with us. But I want to thank each one of you. If you want, we could go to the backstage just for a few minutes if you have time.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.